This exhibit came about as a result of a number of things, one of which was the pandemic, which brought to light the discrepancies and the need to highlight our neighborhoods, our communities. And the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven and its Black Futures Fund and its Vineyard Project raised funds to begin to highlight some of our neighborhoods and some of the history of our neighborhoods, because our history must not be lost. It was also the next step in an exhibit that had taken place at the Yale Law School, which highlighted Costance Baker Motley's legal career. There are many, many people in this community who don't know who Costance Baker Motley is, her impact on the civil rights movement, and that she was a person born and raised in New Haven who had a very vibrant family life, church life, and who was inspired by this community and inspired many others in this community. So we decided that her story, her family story, and the neighborhood story should be told so that the next generations could know who she was and still is as an impactful person who was a native of this community, a native of New Haven. The first window in this exhibit really encapsulates the entire exhibit and its many points of interest. That's because the exhibit, called Timeless, Telling Our Neighborhood Stories, shows Judge Motley, Costance Baker Motley, at the top in one of her first victories outside of the law and the senatorial race for New York State Senate. It also shows New Haven, the island of Nevis, a census showing her family here in New Haven, and a celebration by the Links of New York City, where family members and relatives and friends from New Haven traveled to New York City to participate in that celebration of her. That was in 1962. And you can see that the community of New Haven embraced her honors and all that she had achieved up to that point. The community was always behind her. Chapter 1 is Costance Baker Motley, Telling Our Neighborhood Stories. It's really the first chapter in what we hope will be many more chapters telling the story of New Haven's many neighborhoods and personalities and events. And so this first section really tells about the subchapters within the Costance Baker Motley story. You'll see here that it tells about the Nevis, where her parents came from. There's a photograph of her father and his brother, that's Willoughby. Some siblings. There's a marriage photograph where she was married in St. Luke's Church on Whaley Avenue. There are siblings, there are family. There's a photograph of me and my sister. I'm named for her, Constance also. There's a photograph of her receiving the Presidential Citizens Medal from President Clinton, and the generational aspects. Then we move to her political career and her civil rights career. There's a photograph of her with Martin Luther King and her being sworn in and taking her place in the New York State Senate and as borough president of Manhattan. And right in the center is a picture of New Haven. The point being that New Haven was always the center of her life. In the cupboards here, you'll see some books about her and a photograph right in the middle of her sister, another sibling, Edna Baker Carnegie. And Edna Baker Carnegie was a longtime teacher in New Haven, much revered, and some would say feared, because she was very stern, but her students learned. And in the drawers, you'll see some photographs and a plaque to Edna Baker Carnegie. She was a founder of New Haven's important Freddie Fixer Parade. She was one of 3 founders, and she's received an award for that and an award from the NAACP Greater New Haven. There are lots of awards and things in these drawers. Also of note in this drawer, to bring it all together, is a plaque to Judge Motley given as an alum of the Q House in 1989. So it's fitting that this exhibit has taken place in the Q House. Moving along to the next section is really about Judge Motley's life in New Haven and about New Haven in the early part of the 20th century, because New Haven was the center of family life. It was also a city that was an immigrant city. It was a city of Black and West Indian migration. The church was very much the center of Black life. And in these photographs right here, you can see that Judge Motley and her siblings and friends went to camp and had wonderful times, that there was a young women's organization and singing clubs associated with the church. And then New Haven kind of blossomed in its attempt to build low-rent housing. These are primary documents that were in my mother's archive that apparently don't exist anywhere. So I'm very proud to have been able to share these with the community in this exhibit. You can see there's a co-op store that thrived in the Dixwell neighborhood on Dixwell Avenue. You can find streets where the family lived in these city maps. There is the census where my grandfather is listed, and the children, at least as of this point, are listed. Judge Motley is not on here yet because she was not yet born. Judge Motley was also very active, and the Black community in New Haven was very active in connecting with other Black communities in Connecticut. So for example, there was the Connecticut Negro Bulletin, and there are examples here of that bulletin. There was a page that had announcements of events and concerts and places of business that connected people across Connecticut, so that there was opportunity to come together. This idea that, there were these separations by town or even small communities just was not true. There are additional primary evidence of these bulletins. There was something called the Co-op Journal. And Judge Motley participated. She wrote for these journals. She was very active in the community as an advocate for her community. There's photographs of her, my mother, and a cousin at their class day. There's an old photograph book. There's the church Bible class, from 1939. The one in the bottom here is the Antillean Friendly Association, which was an organization founded in New Haven. And what we have here is the bylaws from 1934. The Antillean Friendly Society was organized in 1934, which is an organization of many West Indian cultures in New Haven. They even had a building, and it was a gathering place for West Indians here in New Haven, which was a central place for many West Indian cultures to come to as immigrants. Judge Motley graduated from Hill House High School in 1939, and for a couple of years she did write for some of these bulletins, but she didn't go to college right away. And that's because there was no money for her to go to college. But she did participate in community activities, and she participated in the Q House, the original Q House. And one day she was asked to speak about the Q House and why it wasn't being used the way the original founders of the Q House had thought it should be used. And one of those founders was Clarence Blakesley, and he was a builder and philanthropist in New Haven. He's a Yale graduate. He was a trustee of the Q House. And she came to a board meeting, and when he asked the question why the Q House wasn't being used, she answered the question and said that the trustees had not asked the people in the community, the users of the Q House, how they wanted the Q House to be used. That was a pretty bold statement for a young Black woman to say to an older white man in those days. But the next day he called her to his office and asked her why she wasn't in college, because he had looked up her academic history and learned that she was very much, a good student. She was an honor student. And she told him there was no money in her family for her to go to college. So he told her he would pay for her to go to college. And what did she want to do when she finished college? She said, I want to be a lawyer. So he told her, I don't know anything about women being lawyers, but if that's what you want to do, I will pay for you to go to law school also. So off she went. It's a photograph of her and friends at Fisk, and she was there for 1 year. She was not happy there because the South was a foreign land to her. It was segregated. It was white and black water fountains, white and black bathrooms, and it was something that she'd never experienced. So she left Fisk and came back to the North, went to NYU, finished her bachelor's, and then went to Columbia Law School. So we'll move over to this section here. This is a photograph of the original Q House. It, of course, is long since demolished, and the building we are now standing in is about a few years old, and the Q House itself, the Dixwell Community Center, Q House, is about to celebrate its 100th anniversary. So, built in 1924 by Clarence Blakesley, he was also a contractor builder, supported by Clarence Blakesley, the man who became Judge Motley's benefactor. The Q House has an incredibly important place in the life of the Dixwell community because it was a gathering place for Black people in this community for athletics, for academics, for meetings and social gatherings. And in the times when it didn't exist, when it had, closed down, there was a real loss in the community for its absence. So the fact that it's celebrating its 100th anniversary is a testament to the resilience of a community that wants a stable community center, and a testament to the fact that one of the community's very important citizens had her beginnings here in the Dixwell Community Center. We're moving on here now to Judge Motley's professional life. She founded herself in New York City because she went to Columbia, got her law degree there, and immediately began working for the Legal Defense Fund with Thurgood Marshall, the first African-American man to have a position on the United States Supreme Court. She very much is indebted to him for having given her that first job, first as an intern in her senior year in law school, and then for nearly 20 years as a lawyer with the Legal Defense Fund. So these show her in her professional capacity. And New York, Harlem was where she lived in law school. She lived at the YWCA. And for 20 years, she litigated many of the cases in the South that changed the course of civil rights. Here we have her with Martin Luther King. She represented Martin Luther King. It's important to note that while she may not have been well known in the white press, the black press, Jet magazine and Ebony magazine covered her widely. And we have here some copies of Jet magazine and Ebony magazine, and in the drawers we also do, because they are historic. Her life was followed. Eventually, she was nominated and appointed, really, by President Lyndon Johnson to become the first Black woman federal judge in 1966. She stayed on the bench until her death, more than 40 years, handled some very important cases. And so we circle back to kind of the humble beginnings, where the family came to this community and to this country. Judge Motley always kept her roots in Connecticut. She bought a house in Chester, Connecticut, just up the road, and maintained that house for 40 years. She purchased a house for her mother on University Place, but Nevis always remained important to the family, the humble beginnings of Nevis. And when my grandmother, Rachel Huggins Baker, died in 1973, the family got together and created a family group that has just this year celebrated 50 years of family reunions. We went back to Nevis. This is 2024. This is the original group. The committee, Judge Motley and her husband, Uncle Joel Motley, are in there. This is the house that she built in Nevis, which is now being renovated. And these are some other reunion photographs where the family has gotten together. And part of that is because she was a very strong linchpin in family connection and remaining connected to New Haven and to Nevis. And she's been honored many, many times. This happens to be a photograph at the Connecticut State House with former Mayor Toni Harp in this Toni and Wendell Harp Museum, where she is ensconced in the Connecticut Hall of Fame. This is a project and an exhibit that we're all very proud of to show to the community. There have been hundreds, if not thousands, of folks who've come through this exhibit and taken the time to look, to open drawers, to see New Haven and to see the life of a person who grew up in New Haven and continued to come back to New Haven, the family connections that are in New Haven, and most importantly, the message of this exhibit is we all have a story to tell. Every family has a story to tell, and to preserve those photographs, those documents, the history of the family, because together they tell the history of the neighborhood. And if you don't save those stories and those histories and documents, the stories of the neighborhoods will disappear. And they'll be told by someone else, not necessarily truthfully. So we want to encourage, by this exhibit, preserve and document the family histories.